Hello and welcome everyone to Authentic Wellness, and this is a 9-part series on understanding complex trauma, my story and coming of age. In this podcast, I'm talking about several topics on CPTSD, all while sharing my story in an effort to cultivate growth and healing so that we can all live authentically well. Again, listeners' discretion is advised as some subjects may be difficult for some listeners to hear, but there is no shame in that. Feel free to step away from the episode and come back to it later. But we're going to jump right in on this one. Today we're going to be talking about the connection that education has on the traumatized child and vice versa. Similar to the last episode, this topic can go many ways. This is merely an introduction and an opportunity for me to share my story on my experience in education. In the future, I will definitely be doing a more extensive series on education and trauma, sharing many components on how to make our schools more trauma-informed and more aware of the needs of students coming from dysfunctional homes. But for this episode, I will only be highlighting 4 main issues I experienced in the education system as a minority and a child coming from a troubled home. In May of 2022, I completed a 4-year degree at George Mason University to get my bachelor's in social work. I cannot explain how numb I was in May 2022. Absolutely not caring about what I had just did or how I did it. See, following my mental health relapse in 2020, I realized I had made a mistake. It was the year when I finally realized that I had unconsciously only picked this major because I resonated with it. Okay, hear me out. Not the social worker, but the social worker's clients completely went over my head for the first 2 years of the degree. So in 2020, I was like, nah, I'm getting triggered every class period. I'm paying $30,000 to be re-traumatized every class period. Like, what the hell am I actually doing? I think it really hit home during the therapy unit, where they told us to get therapy now because in order to help our future clients, we gotta help ourselves. Like, yes, professor, that's really good advice. Let me help myself to the admissions office and terminate my enrollment. However, the only problem with all this is that I am committed. If you can't already tell, once I set forth to do something, I cannot stop until it is completely finished, no matter the quality of the results, it will get done. It is an obsessive trait of mine. So I walked on that stage, they butchered my name, I spotted my parents from the audience, and my father gave me a big thumbs up, like, yeah man, I'm gonna let you savor this moment, because I have yet to show you how much we owe on those loans. But anyways, I graduated, first generation college student, 4.0 GPA, dean's list, and a druggie, let's go. Everyone I talk to, I tell them, I never wanted to be a social worker. I just picked the degree because it was academically easy and I was academically stupid. Always been, but this goes way back, and that's what I'm going to share right now. My personal story of education and how it led to where I am today. P.S. I don't entirely regret my degree, nor is it completely going to waste because of what I do now. Social work is very much focused on trauma-informed care, and I speak and hope to continue speaking on the effects of trauma so that one day some kid won't have to experience what I'm about to share. This is why I speak. For the first 11 years of my education, ages 3 to 14, I attended a Christian private school in Northern Virginia. Not what you were expecting, me either. You have many questions, I had many questions, but now I have answers, and I am here to answer them. In the summer of 2003, my dad was evangelized to by a pastor at a Gold's Gym. After my father supposedly came to Christ, my father shared that he had a 3-year-old daughter and was looking to enroll her in a preschool of some sort. The pastor kindly offered my father of a man, an extremely reduced tuition to a private school across the Gold's Gym. School season came around and I had my first day of preschool. I was much younger than all the other kids, but I had a late summer birthday. I turned 4, but most of them were already 5. I didn't speak a word in English. I've never been around another child my own age, let alone a group of children my own age. I had no idea what anyone was saying, but I was awed by the classroom. I took it pretty well that year. Everything was so new, so different. The next year rolled around and my parents decided to keep me at that school, but to my luck, they held me back and I repeated preschool again, only because I didn't speak English proficiently. I was back in preschool, but this time as the biggest and oldest kid in the class. However, all that didn't bother me till later. I loved school. I simply adored it. I wanted to learn every subject and everything. Kindergarten was the same way. I remember finding a love of learning, a love of counting and reading. I thought I was very smart. I kept attending that school, but my parents were beginning to pay a little more and more each year. I was a bit intimidated to go to the first grade because it was the first year we had to wear uniforms. The first day of first grade was a nightmare. I still remember it to this day. I'm 23 and I remember my first day of first grade because it was horrendous. As I said, we needed uniforms. My parents didn't know where to get them. They didn't know who to ask. They didn't know what they looked like. They sent me in regular clothes on my first day. Mind you, I came from an immigrant household. My parents didn't know what they were doing, didn't have the resources to find out. My mother never spoke English. I still remember it to this day. I felt completely embarrassed. All the kids immediately started asking why I'm not wearing the uniform. Like, what do I even say? My teacher came up to me 3 times, told me that I should have worn a uniform to school and make sure I understood. I understood way before she had to open her mouth, but it was out of my control. My mother didn't speak English. My father worked in construction. We could barely afford food at home. I understood. Another thing that happened to me that day, my mother packed me Oreos for snack. The teacher had sent out a letter a few weeks prior that only healthy snacks would be allowed in her classroom. Oreos were one of the healthiest foods I ate. She told me not to bring those anymore and that my mother should have packed me something else. I wasn't allowed to eat them that day either. Another thing that happened on the first day were reading group assignments. Like I said, prior, I loved to read. I thought I was good at it. I would grasp language so articulately and translate English to Spanish and vice versa cohesively at 7. I knew I would be put into the most prestigious, rigorous reading group. I was not. Quite the opposite. I questioned the placement and was given a response I would hear many more times at school. You need more practice in the beginner's English group because you speak Spanish at home. Okay, fine. I was the best one in the group, so I still knew I was smart. I still loved learning, but something started to settle in me that I was different. I don't think this happened the first day, but the first week. My teacher put up a chart about teeth we had lost. Our baby teeth, because we were at that age. By our names, every time we lost a tooth, we would place a sticker under the number of our lost tooth. If this was your 4th time losing a tooth, you'd put down 4 stickers on the chart. She went around and asked. These kids had like 2, 3, 4, even 0 sometimes. I had lost 9 teeth before I got to 1st grade. My mouth was full of crowns and fillings because all my baby teeth had rotted, turned black and fallen out by the time I got to 1st grade. This tooth thing was humiliating. But of course I didn't know why I had lost the most teeth. But it all had to do with my diet. A pure sugar, candy, and soda. I'm a diabetic at 23, if you can't already tell. This is neglect. Ding ding, neglect. By the time I was 8 years old, I understood what discrimination was. I was often the center of attention for being one of the only brown kids in the school. They said that I looked Mexican. They said I was from Mexico. I wasn't, but no one at that age knows what El Salvador is yet. So I had to be Mexican. It was also at that age that I noticed that most of all the other kids had 2 working parents with real jobs and both of them spoke English. I had to translate everything for my mom, and I had to go with her to work every weekend and help her clean houses. My dad looked around for jobs, but he couldn't find any. He'd come home, get drunk, throw things, and hurt us. It was my life, it's all I knew. We had a family tree assignment in the 2nd grade. I had made shit up because I've never been exposed to any other family besides my mom, dad, and baby sister. All the other kids had many more siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. That concept was so surreal. You have cousins, other kids your own age and in your family, and grandparents? I had no one, and my parents didn't have anything to say about them either. 3rd grade was the only good year I would have before my life became an even greater living hell than it already was. I had a beautiful teacher. She was an incredible artist. She made every subject so engaging and knew how to make her students love to learn. I loved learning. Her lessons came easy to me and I participated all the time in her class. And then, all of a sudden, I couldn't see all that well. I needed glasses. No one in my family ever had glasses. I remember having to get a pair that was so ugly, I felt disgusted in myself every time I wore them. They were round and made of wire, no frame. They were always too tight on my nose. At this point in time, I was 10 and in the 4th grade. My personal life was very difficult every day and I was often miserable at home. My academic ability, whatever I had at that time, began to plummet. In math especially. This was the year I was given my first tutor. To this day, I cannot explain how much I dreaded having to have a math tutor after school every Tuesday. The older lady was nice and all, but just the idea that I wasn't meeting the academic standard at my grade infuriated me. Every Tuesday, all I would think about is having to stay after school. This is anxiety at its prime. I would purposely starve myself. I would self-harm. I would write in my notebooks on how angry I was and how unfair my life was. I would weep on the pages to convey emotion, and I would curse the subject of math and tell it to burn in hell. I was 10, doing the most because when I got that tutor, you best believe my parents were putting the financial blame on me for having to pay this lady to help me in math. Every time I needed extra help or any form of assistance, my parents would make me feel like I was a waste of space, their money and time. My stupidity is the reason they can't pay bills. I wrote this in a journal in 2009. My self-esteem began to plummet, began to drop because I now knew I wasn't smart. I was getting bullied by classmates and teachers for being dumb or not knowing the answer when I was called on. The small feeling I had since I started school, the idea that I wasn't worthy of participating, leading, being first, or receiving any recognition because I was different, due to my social economic status and race, skyrocketed. I just stopped participating at all because every subject suddenly became really hard. 5th grade was the worst year of my life. A lot of people aren't really ready when I tell them this story, so if medical abuse triggers you, then skip a few minutes forward, or come back to this episode another time. I previously gave away some hints of where my health as a child was going based on what I ate and what my teeth looked like pretty early on, but it was the internal health issues that landed me in the hospital for 2 weeks. The 2 weeks that happened to be the first 2 weeks of 5th grade. I was having abnormal stomach issues. I remember having episodes of extreme nausea and ongoing heartburn and indigestion, which was just so uncomfortable. Doctors didn't know what was going on. I was too young to have any serious medical issues, so they just admitted me to the hospital. Made me drink a gallon of some liquid to do some scan, which I later spent the next week vomiting up because there was way too much fluid in my body that they forced me to drink. Pure misery, but the absolute worst part of this hospital stay was all the drugs they injected me, because I was nonstop screaming in pain. My parents kept telling them I have a lot of anxiety, so they injected me with, now when I look at it, abnormal doses of antipsychotics to a 12-year-old girl, weighing the size of a healthy 9-year-old. I was incredibly malnourished. The worst part came when I was all drugged up on these medications that I, now being one to do them, never have experienced anything like that. I had a hallucinogenic episode that I experienced when I was 12. I swear I was tripping in that hospital bed. It felt like the bed was jerking back and forth. I couldn't keep my head up. I saw rainbows and stars in cartoons and my principal, and like 12 nurses crowded around the bed telling me to blow on a pinwheel while another had a stress ball attached to my hand. I felt like I was going so fast but moving so slow. This went on, which felt like minutes, but what all followed was me passing out for the next 24 hours and not waking up. I assumed I was a coma, or my body just giving out. Everything went black. I'm not entirely sure what happened, and I was discharged because nobody could figure anything out. The whole hospital stay could have been prevented if I hadn't been malnourished, because once I turned 13, I began eating vegetables for the first time and my GI issues ceased to exist for some time. They're back now, but for a few years I was able to eat and get a normal weight. Why I tell you this story? Because this was the peak moment in my life when I stopped having any trust and security in my parents because I explicitly told them not to tell the teacher. I was in the hospital for extreme reasons because I would be embarrassed. Everyone in my class would know when I came back. You know what they had the audacity to do? They crossed a small boundary I had set and told the whole school administration. They held an assembly for me. The whole school, every student and teacher at the time was told that I was dying or gravely ill in the hospital. When I found this out, I kid you not, I have never felt this amount of betrayal that I felt that day. I began screaming and crying hysterically because to a 12-year-old who hates being the center of attention because she's never had any good attention, can you fucking imagine how scarring that was? I cried so horribly, the children's counselor at the hospital came to talk to me. For 5 minutes without my parents in the room, she reassured me that if any of the kids asked about why I was in the hospital, to give them her number and she would talk to them, that I didn't have to explain anything. That was the first and only time in my childhood where someone spoke to me one-on-one and reassured me and helped me find a solution to a problem. The only time I was reassured as a child. As expected, I came back to school. All these kids, in lower grades and grades above me, interrogated me with questions. I was embarrassed, distressed, and miserable. To make it even worse than that was the summer I got braces. I was the only kid in class with glasses and braces. The embarrassment of being harassed with questions about my personal life became a trauma for me. I was from then on bullied regularly, made fun of for the way I looked. I was a Hispanic girl, skin and bone, so skinny I looked like I had an eating disorder. I was developmentally behind, about to be academically behind because I missed the first 2 weeks of school. Remember those tutoring sessions in the 4th grade? Well, I qualified to be in the advanced math class in 5th grade. I was ecstatic. I couldn't believe it. On the first day of class, I felt so proud of myself. It was the only thing I had going for me. But the second day of 5th grade, my teacher told me I couldn't go back to the advanced class because she didn't think I was able to succeed in it, simply because I had been in the hospital and it would be too challenging for me. I was gutted. My self-esteem plummeted in a way like no other. I gave up on learning from that day forward. I took up the identity of stupid. One class assignment was to make wordles for everyone in the class, and they were like these collages of words to describe everyone. You would put them into a computer, and it would just create a colorful collage. Everyone in the class took turns putting characteristics for everyone in the class. When I got mine back, words on there were dumb, crazy, weird. I started acting out that year, misbehaving on purpose, getting detention, getting held during recess or after school. I no longer cared. I hated school and it hated me. I was back in tutoring sessions. That year alone I had 7 tutors. They all gave up on me because I didn't try. You couldn't get me to try. I was stubborn as hell. I was threatened to be held back in the 5th grade because I was failing. The only way this teacher would not hold me back was if I stayed after school almost every day for extra help. I hated it. irate when this teacher would be one-on-one with me. It made me feel weak. She made me uncomfortable. And it made me feel weak in general when I had always had to be strong. I would take pencils and self-harm while I was tutored because my anger was so intense. The early years were traumatic. My middle school years were thankfully met with more caring and kinder teachers. But I was still not academically there. I was always behind. I was bullied relentlessly. Kids were clever with words and made racist comments to get under my skin. I pleaded with my parents to take me out of the school, but they scared me with horrific depictions of public schools. Middle school was really when I started to acknowledge that I have these needs that other children don't have. I was very aware that I was different and that my life at home was different, my parents were different, and that I was a very defective person. I struggled to focus. I would dissociate every class period. My mind would wander to places where I was loved. I was the biggest daydreamer you would ever meet. I would daydream of what it would be like to be held for the first time or to receive a hug or to feel safe. I would daydream of what it would be like to be my classmates, to go to sports after school, to go see family, to go see friends, to travel, to be able to afford things at the store and never be hungry or unsatisfied. I especially wondered what it would be like to be pretty. See, since a young age, my depiction of beautiful was being white, having thinner, longer hair, looking good in everything, and simply having white privilege. It was something I longed for. I hated myself. I thought I was utterly disgusting. I hated my body, my appearance, how I was always too skinny, too brown. I used to stutter a lot too. My mannerisms were off. I went heavy on the eye makeup. My wrists were full of self-harm scars. I would cry in the bathroom and then return to class like nothing happened. When I finally got out of the most problematic school in the world, I was happy, yet scared, knowing I had never been exposed to students who were brought up in the church. I also went into high school thinking I was utterly stupid. When it came to picking my classes, I remember picking the easiest classes. No honors, no AP, because my whole life I had been told by teachers and peers that I was terrible at anything academic. Because my self-esteem was so low, I took the most basic classes with some of the worst behaved, incredibly hurtful students I have ever witnessed. After my first month in public school, I realized I had made a mistake, because I was actually incredibly smart. I qualified into all honors courses. It took me by surprise how my whole life had been made to seem stupid when I was actually smart. That really hurt me, and it really set me back. To the point that I didn't even want to take the honors classes, because for once I could come home from school and not be drowning in assignments. The first year of high school was a much needed break for me. But to my luck and misfortune, everything got so much worse. In high school, I learned extremely quickly that friends are oh so temporary. But that also meant that I didn't have to see people I didn't want to see all day because classes were so differently scheduled. The main area of hardship came when it came to making friends. When I realized that I was either too whitewashed to hang out with students just like me or still too much of a minority when it came to hanging out with smart or simply students whose parents had money and reputation. For the majority of high school, I honest to God had no idea what I was doing. I was as much as a first-generation high school student for that matter that I had to figure out how to forge signatures on a lot of school forms because my parents wouldn't have been able to understand the school form anyways. I had to figure out the whole college process as well. I remember cutting out of frustration and having to struggle filling out FAFSA, both my portion and my parents'. From 10th to 12th grade, all I can recall doing is homework, from the time I got off the bus till it was time to go to bed. The workload in high school was monumental. Ongoing busy work, and so many worksheets and papers. High school for me was 100,000 times harder than college. I only got into 2 universities out of the 5 applications I submitted. I honestly didn't even expect to get into one, due to my pit-sunken self-esteem. I genuinely believed my stupidity was a sign of character at this point in my life, and that I would never be gifted in any way academically. However, shortly after my acceptance letters, I grew to understand why. I received an AP score of 5 in the psychology exam. It was something my eyes couldn't quite process because I had never received a fantastic grade in anything, let alone an AP exam. Yes, I knew I liked psychology, happened to be the first subject I could hear a lecture on and not leave my body. This class was phenomenal. I knew the ins and outs of every lesson. It was the first subject I was good at and engaged with, but of course at this point in time I didn't know why. College. I made a mistake with college, and I realized that once I committed to Liberty University for the fall of 2019. My first semester in college, I chose Liberty for 2 reasons. My blinded, repressed self mentally thought this: if I can go through 11 years of private school, I can do 4 more. And something along the lines of, this feels familiar, therefore this is what I should do. My girl, if I could talk to you right now, there would just be so much. I also didn't know how much private universities cost. I only got into LU and George Mason, but I initially chose Liberty to leave home. Something was telling me to leave my family. Would I regret it once I got there? Yes, but this would also be the beginning of something that I so desperately needed to happen, aka my relapse and resurfacing of trauma to heal. Yes, Liberty was interesting. I was a first generation, had no idea what was going on, how to do things. I barely knew how to do my own laundry or ride the bus, but here I was going to have to learn one way or another. Making friends was incredibly difficult for some reason, many obvious reasons. I didn't have a roommate, I didn't know how to act, financial aid was like, what? So once Christmas break hit, I reapplied to GMU. I got in and terminated my enrollment at Liberty. I couldn't take it anymore. I felt so alone and so different. I didn't like how it felt to be reminded of what 11 years of my previous life consisted of. There's so much more that happened there, but more detail in another episode. At Mason, prior to COVID-19, I thrived. A complete 180 from Liberty. I, for now and for once, had too many friends. I was extremely involved and I was working again. That's also when I started really experimenting with drugs and I was getting prescribed a lot of medication. I became addicted to stimulants, which caused some strong emotion I had never felt before. I became reckless. At this point, I did not study or did the bare minimum to study. I would have others do my work for me. I would take Adderall to write a paper or cram for a test the day before so I could party all weekend. I loved my life. I call it the calm before the storm. In March 2020, COVID obviously hit. I considered dropping out. I was stuck living in a one-bedroom apartment again after living by myself for almost 2 years. I went home, became extremely distressed, thus when I relapsed. My relapse caused a lot of academic issues. I completely stopped taking classes for a whole semester, leaving me behind because I could not get any work done. I simply did what I wanted when it came to school. Once in-person classes came back, I merely did not show up. I would go to work instead. My senior year of college, I stopped participating. I stopped paying any form of attention. My mind was so gone, so lost, preoccupied with the idea of how much it was costing me to sit in that class at that desk, so much that I couldn't be a student. I could not get myself to listen to the lessons because of how heavy the guilt and anxiety of how much debt I was in. Another thing to mention was that my junior year of college was the first time I received any accommodations for school. I was able to pass a math class this way and submit assignments on time. The first time I was able to receive help, a part of me cried inside for 2 reasons. I finally felt like I received some form of justice for myself. I had a disability. I had an attention disorder. And I didn't have to try. I didn't have to kill myself trying anymore. And secondly, I felt like I had a choice in things for once. I could choose to take longer. I could choose to take my time. I was giving grace to myself that I never did before. And so I got a degree, but it's not my degree. I don't feel like I earned it. I feel like I didn't do anything for it, but it's there. I did it for my parents and basically no one else. I never felt proud of myself for it. To this day, if I could get a refund, I would. And that was that. With what you heard, a story very different from the usual. And after hearing all that, I don't want this podcast to seem like it's me ranting about my life. It was me telling my story. Yes, it was, for the sake of this introductory episode series. But more than anything, I'm here to educate. I'm here to inform and to talk about ways that the education system, my experiences within the education system affected me as an adult, on top of growing up in a dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional home, full of harm, neglect, abuse, and chaos. From what I just described, 4 key issues stand out within the education system and how children growing up like myself experience the education system. The first issue I want to target today is none other than discrimination, bullying, oppression, anything of that sort, comparison with being singled out, anything like that. From the earliest point in my life, I was comparing myself to other people. I did from a very young age. Too young to even understand a lot of concepts of the world on how I was different. Not only by my physical complexion, my ethnicity, my race, but by my mannerisms, by from where I came from, where I would go home to every day, what brought me joy and what made me upset. Early on in my story, I tell how being placed in a private school was more dehumanizing than not. I'm very aware that my parents think that this was the best option. Being in their shoes, I would also think this is the best option for my child. Like, how great is it to be given the scholarship to attend a private school as an immigrant in America? Who wouldn't want that for their child, instead of putting them in a public school system, which was already having a bad rep? What I call this is falling through the cracks, which is where people don't realize the effects that something that they think is good can have on the person that is going to experience it. Of course, there was no way to know that putting me in that school would set me up for years of being made fun of, being called out, being singled out for the color of my skin, for the way I talk, and for my parents' background and my background and things like that. In my field, it's very important to identify areas of discrimination. 3 of the most harmful things that discrimination can do to children is to reduce their confidence in themselves, significantly lower the self-esteem, and impact their feelings of belonging and how they see themselves. To me, because I was often singled out for being myself, something I couldn't control, This took a large toll on my self-esteem. I mentioned that around 4th grade was when I started to shut down, either really stop participating at all because I don't feel worthy of doing it. Not that I didn't know the answer, I just didn't feel worthy of doing it because I was of another race, I was of a different background than these kids. It feels stupid to say that this was occurring literally like 12 years ago, where this shouldn't have been a thing. Overall, I really think private schools, or any schools in general, any school you have to pay for, should at minimum have a cultural competency program for instructors and teachers so that they can pass it on to their students. There was nothing cultural about that school. There was such a lack of diversity that was there. And that is why culture needs to be implemented in schools. When an instructor clearly has kids who are minorities to the class, they require special attention. Special attention needs to be made there to recognize them. And teachers need to understand that these children will struggle being in that class, being in a class where nobody else is like them. And I think that deserves more attention. Coming from a dysfunctional home, we already knew we were different. So to wrap up my number one issue with these things, these are things that can continue to be done to improve and avoid ongoing discrimination in children who are in environments where they clearly don't fit in, where they may be viewed as different. This not only goes for race, it goes for any type of disability, discrimination, identity, whatever the case may be. Make sure the classroom environmental lesson plans are all-inclusive material. Material should be diverse, not a one-size-fits-all curriculum. We need to be implementing policies to identify where discrimination can be an issue. We are also going to have to do staff trainings with the whole staff of the school, not only the teachers. We are going to include nurses, counselors, specialty teachers, literally anyone who's going to have contact with students to participate in these training programs, to better understand and to better help students, not only those who are considered minorities, but students who come from different households, different living lifestyles. Because you never know. How could you ever know the student's history or a student's past? There's no way, and better safe than sorry. We're going to engage families and communities and make sure they feel included, that they receive any support they need, whether that be at home with resources for their child's academic benefits, resources in the community, anything like that. The school is the closest connection a student has to success and to their personal lives because they're there every single day. Issue number 2 that affected me would be the academic performance being set up to fail. There's a lot that can go under here, but I want to highlight the achievement gap in Latino education, but honestly for all minorities. And not everyone could be affected by this. In some way, it really depends on how the classroom is structured. It depends on the curriculum and how it is given out. It depends on the flexibility and ability for teachers to give specialized attention to some students who may be behind but are equally as intelligent. I hope that makes sense. But basically, a lot happens in the early years of education as children are placed behind on the academic performance. More or less, or more often than not, minority students of color, are placed in more beginner-level academic placement based on the teacher and based on some factors. Some factors that can lead to these placements are if the student speaks another language other than English at home, if a student struggles particularly with reading, if a student is more so on the hyperactive and attentive side. This is also based on family reputation, previous siblings, where were they placed, or how teachers view the parents of the child. Of course, you can see a lot goes into these assumptions, which are often not true and shouldn't be a determining factor. I'm a strong believer that students should not be judged based on where they come from their backgrounds to the way they act. It's more on what the student is able to demonstrate, how much effort the student puts in their work, and what the student wants for themselves and what they want to achieve. For myself personally, I remember being in love with school. I loved to learn and I loved to read. Everything was new and I wanted to learn everything, but being placed in a class that was way too easy for me in the beginning, with no way to move up, no opportunity to move up, and no way to speak up for myself, there was really no way that I was able to have access to resources that other students were having in order to have greater success academically in the long run. I did not have access to that simply because the teacher assumed I was not able to be at that level year after year. I was repeatedly held back. I strongly believe that if I were to move schools, I would not have been placed in a lower placement because I was never given the chance to really demonstrate and really convey what I wanted to learn, really demonstrate what I knew. I never made it to the top. It was very clear that I was always so behind everyone. It was made known to me. This cut off all my self-esteem. It made me shut down. I was belittled every day, and the oppression eventually got to me and I became stuck. After years and years of being told that I would never be in an advanced placement academic course or class or something above beginner, I gave up. That's why I stopped caring when I got to high school. I picked all the easiest courses, but little did I know, unfortunately, that I was at the highest academic level for a freshman that I could be. I could have done AP courses, but obviously chose not to because I thought I was dumb. We need this to stop. I don't understand how certain teachers can make those assumptions and it does not benefit the student. It begs the question, how can teachers take the one-sided knowledge they know about the student's home life and attribute it to academic placement? Yet how can the teacher know a partial part of the home life and not separate that from a student's academic ability or to do something about it? Why are they instead not asking the question, what is stopping the child from being able to have success, and who is limiting the opportunities to a child from being able to succeed? That is their future. They're right, and nobody should go in the way of that. Instead of limiting the child by holding them back and putting them in easier classes so that they can be less stressed, let's target the stress. There's something going on at home that needs resources, and the teacher can help with that. The school can help with that. I understand that teachers are so underfunded. It's a significant issue, and it is a lot on their plate to deal with things like this, but there needs to be more that is done there. Needs to be more involvement with the families, more support with the families in the schools. It does not have to necessarily be the teacher's role or position to do that, but there can be more done. Simply, if there is an accessibility to more resources, those resources will fill some gaps. The achievement gap basically states that some students, some kids, will be at a higher disadvantage due to their circumstances in their home and their environment because of their financial stability. Everything that the student's family has or what the student is given to succeed has a cause and effect. This concept asks several questions. If the student is not getting enough to eat, is there no food in the home? Does the student have other responsibilities that come before schoolwork? Does that student have parents that are able to provide them and fulfill their needs? Or is there an area where the parent needs support, where the parent needs help on certain levels? Is there a lack of childcare? And does that child have a place to study, a safe place to rest, a place to call their own? These, of course, are things that can get in the way of a student's academic success, of their ability to focus, their ability to concentrate in the school. If they're tired, how would they focus? How would that be possible? So it is definitely more of a school's job to take that student, assess their needs, their family's needs, asking a student in a private conversation how they need help in the home instead of belittling the child for failing a quiz. Let's ask the child if there is something they need, if there's something they don't have. What is going on at home? Is mom and dad okay? Do they need help, or are they struggling in any other way? Children tend to view home life factors as personal burdens for why they are not achieving academically. They put the problems on themselves and take them to school. I think conversations need to be had that allow teachers to communicate to students that some situations are not a part of their identity. They do not have to get in the way of their success. Support is here and it is needed, not only by the teachers but by a school board. We, the adults raising the next generation of fighters, how can a child obtain success if they carry burdens of adults before they even understand some of these concepts? When I was in school, I felt that everything was my fault, but obviously I'm not in school anymore. I'm a full-grown adult. Elementary school was years ago. So I hope the system has improved and some way has begun to be more trauma informed. But if it's not, we have to start now. Children cannot control their outcome. Children cannot control where they live and where they come from what they do most of the time. So it is the parents or the adult's role to step in and help that child grow or succeed, or else we're just going to continue having issues. We're going to continue having homelessness, poverty, because children are not given an equal opportunity to succeed in the education system. And that's all I have to say about that before I get infuriated to a point, because I do believe I am triggered. But to wrap this up, the third and final issue I want to talk about is the teacher interactions with students. This is a big one. This is more of an overall theme of the issue that I have discussed. I know everyone who went to school can relate to this, but some teachers were complete assholes. Some teachers could care less. Some teachers are there for money. It's really a hit or miss when it comes to instructors, but much like there are background checks for the federal government, let's make sure those teachers' background checks are a little harder. I would say not only only do you assess that the teacher is qualified to teach, but is the teacher qualified to interact with the population of students that they're going to be teaching? I think there's a big flaw within private and public, let alone any school who hires teachers who have this plethora of academic degrees and knowledge, but do they or are they able to interact with their said given population that they're going to teach? No. If we are not qualified to work with a population groups of children, then we're not qualified to teach there. If we are not willing to take training courses on being trauma informed, on being informed on mental health, if we cannot respect student boundaries, if we cannot talk to a student in a non-demeaning way based on their academic performance, then we are not qualified to teach them. I can't begin to explain the harm that is being done to students on the basis of the teachers behind their students going home crying because of what the teacher said to them. Are students going home crying because the teachers refused to intervene, that they were being bullied when they were upset? Or are they coming home crying because this teacher never once made themselves a source of support and safety net for a child from the beginning so that children can lean on for support? There's students who look up to their teachers as a role model and as an example, as the only safe person in their life, and they choose to let that student down. There are teachers who choose to give up on a student instead of trying to help them find ways to improve. They also fail to try to get other teachers involved to help the student. My 7th grade math teacher refused to speak for me for weeks on end because I kept failing her quizzes. As a 13-year-old girl, I didn't know what to make out of that, guys. I just felt horrible. What was I supposed to do? This was out of my control. I don't know why I was being punished on behalf of something I really couldn't control, but this is only one example. I would wish and hope that every student is able to have access to a teacher who is loving and accepting and willing to not only teach, but to help teach with kindness, because most students don't learn the hard way. They don't learn with punishment. They don't work great when they get things taken away. They learn with kindness. They learn with effort and dedication, and first and foremost, respect. Teachers that believe in their students have the best outcomes. That being said, there is a lot that is missing there. There's a lot of trauma-informed skills in the system that are missing. Private and public alike. I only went to public school for 4 years of my life, and there were a significant amount of issues. There were some teachers who really took their jobs to help the students, but there were some creatures in there who had criminal records, whom talked down to students in such horrible ways. I wonder why students do not have a voice in public schools. With all that being said, I'm coming to a close on this episode. I thank you guys again for listening to this segment on how the education system is flawed, how there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but overall, I hope you enjoyed hearing my story. I hope that this meets you with some comfort and not trigger you to an extreme, but by all means, if you find it at any moment that you were triggered, feel free to turn it off and come back at another time when you're ready for the future episode. I want to leave today's podcast with a quote from the National Education Association on Trauma-Informed Schools, and I quote, "ACE's awareness and engagement on a national level is imperative to ensure students are healthy, safe, engaged, and supported so that they are ready to learn. Trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed environments allow educators the opportunity to collaborate in a way that supports a student's mental and physical health so that learning can occur." In a previous episode, we talked about ACEs and how detrimental they can be. The National Education Association, this organization has affiliate organizations in every state with more than 14,000 communities across the U.S. And I quote, "They bring the expertise, drive, and dedication of 3 million educators and allies who advance justice and excellence in public education. This organization has done a tremendous amount of advocacy and provision of resources for public schools in order to enhance the students' well-being." I hope there can be more organizations that can learn from this one on how to make schools more trauma-informed and safer for the student amongst everything that has been going on in the schools in past years. Schools need healing. Students need healing. Thank you once again for listening to this episode. I really hope this series is providing a lot of new information, and I hope you guys are enjoying hearing my ratchet story. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about the brain, trauma in the brain. This is such a crazy episode. You will not want to miss this. I kid you not, you won't want to miss this one. But until next time, I hope you stay authentically well.